Since I have some experience in making games and helping a lot of companies who try to use gamification to add to something that they have, it turns out that I regularly explain the same things, and I thought I would share with you what I think are the top 10 principles of gamification. The first thing is gamification is not a game. So, you need to already know, for example, if you want to gamify a website, it needs to already work and have a reason for being. It needs to be designed. Gamification is not a solution of the fact that you actually don't know how to organize your site. One way to make a differentiation between gamification and game, that usually in gamification there's an external goal. So for example, if you make a game about teaching fractions, you're trying to teach fractions, that's the goal of the game. If you make a game by itself, it's usually a much more complex set of goals that are interdependent, and they have obstacles and everything. But usually when we do gamification, the goals are actually set by the environment, not by the game itself. It's because you're trying to teach something. The second thing is to keep score. So in gamification, there are basic principles that work. The reason we like gamification is because there's something about us that makes us care about high score, points, getting badges, getting positive rewards. With the young generation now, it works particularly well because it's a language that they understand. So when you adapt and you attach those elements to something that you're trying to get people to do, it actually helps them understand what the goal is, because it is like crumbles along the road of where you're trying to get them. They understand that if there is a badge, they should try to get it. And they understand the language about that usually would be attached to that. If you give them points, they know that they should get more points. So it's a way to guide the user towards whatever goal you're trying to achieve. At the same time, there are some basic things about that are attached to fun that as human beings, we have a tendency to think are fun. And I can't really tell you why, but I can tell you that they actually work. The first one is, goal and rewards. So if I give you, coins, you will want to have more coins. That's a general principle. Another thing that works is obstacle. It turns out that it's, if you need to go from A to B, there could be nothing here, and it would be boring. But if I actually make it more complex, it becomes fun. So, artificial layers, walls, in any kind of directions are actually helping people to be interested in the goal. Obviously, when you do gamification, the walls might be by themselves implied by the fact that you're trying to teach people something. You don't have to necessarily add them. They're already maybe part of the fact that it's difficult to invert matrices, and so that by itself is an obstacle. Time pressure. So it turns out whether you play Pac-Man or, Space Invader was actually one of the very first game where time pressure was added because it was not in Pong and it was not in Breakout, but the fact that if you don't do and don't kill all those aliens that are going to kill you is somehow predictable, and it will happen in under 3 minutes. That adds time pressure, and somehow that's fun. The third rule that is quite important is that innovation matters. This is a game from 6th century, Ludo. Not very compelling to most kids. They can play about it a little bit now, but you're not going to have them play this for hours and hours because they understand quickly that it's an old game. Entertainment requires some form of innovations. If you think of movies, Rumble 25 is not going to get anybody to go to the movie theaters. You need new stuff. In this case, Angry Birds, they reinvented the concept of the slingshot. And somehow that's fun because it's new, and you can't really make a lot of games with slingshots now because it's kind of been done. One thing that's interesting about technology is that the shelf life is short. So it's almost like carrots or fruits. You have to figure out how to replace it. So when you do gamification, one of the consequences of gamification is that the content will have to be refreshed regularly, maybe every year, maybe faster than that. Surprise, give a gift to the user very quickly in gamification. It's important. It's kind of a way to prove that you have gamification. If people think that the game is boring, in general, you'll have about, I said 11 seconds here because it's been measured in the past. They're very short amount of time. People are going to have an impression at the very beginning, and before they leave the game, you have a very short period of time to convince them otherwise that this might be actually interesting, and the best way is to give them something. It turns out that in movie theaters, in the first minute, people know already if they're going to like the movie at the end. That's why there's an action sequence in Bond movies at the beginning. It's just to remind you that it's an action movie. Scoring is multidimensional. So if you start to have points, you'll start to have, a leaderboard. But if you only have one leaderboard, then there's really only one person who can win. And that's boring. Well, it's not boring for the person who is winning, but for everybody else, it's kind of annoying. And so it's crucial to create different directions and different dimensions where people can measure themselves so that they can always find a way of thinking on how well they are doing and think that they are doing well. And if you do things in a community environment, then there are well-known directions and player types. And this is a list of actions that you could have. For example, the player types here are people who would like to express, people who like to explore, compete, and collaborate. And that's the list of verbs that have been put in place by Amy Joachim, but the Richard Bartels player types are well understood. It's explorers, socializers. It's an ecosystem of people who believe in communities, and for a community to thrive, you need to have each of them. You need to satisfy each type. Another thing here is, for example, the state landscape. So in SimCity 3000, if you've ever played it, you will know that you're trying to grow your population and you kind of need some money to run your city. And what I've built here is a little map of how 1,000 people have played the game, because people were able to upload the games and we've been able to track exactly what they've done. And you learn and you study what do people do. It turns out that in SimCity 3000, people will, in a very difficult way, they would grow their population and they would have very, very little money. And then at some point in the game, they will discover they can increase taxes. And so they increase taxes, and then nobody goes into that city anymore, but they become rich. And it turns out that it's boring. And so you see all those lines here in that landscape. It's created by all those players who discovered taxation. And it's a flaw in the game design here. It's kind of an interesting thing to see, because what we should have done is actually bring people back to the starting place when that happens. And that would have been a more fun game. But that's an example of the kind of thing that you can study when you do gamification. The other thing is play to win. So if you have a game, you need to figure out a way for people to win it. It's just boring if they lose all the time. It seems super simple to think about, but not something that's implemented by everybody. What I like about games like Tetris is that if you just play against yourself, you're kind of guaranteed to win. And there is something very interesting about a classical way to win, which I'm trying to show here. But you know that at Tetris, if you've played Tetris, at the beginning you will die at level 1, and then after a while you'll survive to level 2 and level 3. You're going to learn it like a music instrument, because that's what we do when we learn. We just conscious process moves into unconscious process that give us more time. And it's actually critical in many games that I'm describing, I'm trying to show here. Your first attempt, you're going to spend too much time. The purple here, or blue, purple here, is kind of the time that the user spend, consciously about something. And the more attempts you do at a game, the less time you spend. And so you actually become more productive. So the first time you play the game, you are very unproductive, but by the mere fact that you keep playing again, you become more productive and you become successful. And if you're conscious about this as a gamification designer, you can guarantee that your users will win. Competition, games in many ways means competing. So the discovery we made at Electronic Arts in the 90s is that we actually don't need to have a loser for every winner. That was a breakthrough thinking. Took us no less than 10 years to get there. But from that moment, we've made careful that whenever there were people competing against one another, we would actually give something to both sides so that nobody, we don't take the points from one side to the other. And what we've learned recently with games on Facebook and things like that, where people can actually sometimes buy their points and things like that, is that having multiple point system is actually better. So you can have badges, coins, other points. The more point systems you have, there's probably an optimum, but it's definitely more than one is the optimum. It's at least two. A big mistake I hear from many people is that they want things to be more realistic because it's going to be more fun. The reality is not fun. Okay? So symbols are fun. That's more fun. And symbols are also more personal. So there's a great book by Scott McCloud called Understanding Comics that if you ever want to do games of any kind, you should read. It's a comic book, so it's really easy to read. And just remind us that this might be me, but this is definitely me. In fact, you can see. I just looked at the latest movie trailer that was coming up. This is kind of symbolisms you're going to get attached to those characters very, very quickly, and that's powerful. But it's not just characters; it's also actions. So one thing in The Sims we were doing is the wedding, the way you get married is we had, the character kneel in front of the other and present, a ring. In fact, he was just presenting his hand. You could not see there was a ring or not. And that everybody on the planet understood what that meant, and knew exactly what was going on there. So symbols are very powerful. Now, the things that are not fun again, it turns out that graphs are not fun. This is not fun. This is not fun. And tables are not fun either, so please avoid them as much as possible. And finally, try to make this for everyone. So, think about handicap and accessibility. Many games could be playable by handicapped people, but are not just because they've been ignored. It's just not fair. Giving control of the pace to users, especially in education, I think is absolutely critical. You want people to be able to play fast, but you want people also to play it slow. One key thing that I do always when I make games is I bring people younger and younger. So whenever I make a game, I'll try to, when I think I'm done, I'll bring a 10-year-old, and then an 8-year-old, and then a 6-year-old, and then a 4-year-old. And I try to see why they're failing, and I try to fix that, because it will actually make the game better for a 30-year-old if I remove those problems. Here's a little example, interactive. It's a simple function. It's a one line of Mathematica where I blur here. And then the goal here is to try to see when, where am I supposed to click on this image? And as I bring slowly, hopefully it works there, you start to see the UI come up, and it's a very good test on websites and things like that to have an understanding, is this really, is it obvious for the user what he should be clicking on? And you don't want to actually understand the scene just at this level already. There's some red stuff here, there's some green stuff here, those big buttons, that's all I need to know at a high level. Very useful tool. Here it is. That was it.